the recording as well. Yeah. So we won't be waiting for like any more participants because these sessions are quite exclusive, just for like 45 minutes to 1 hour sessions. Like all of those were joining from different like WhatsApp groups which have been created are good to go. Okay. So we're having around 50 plus participants join from all the different groups. Okay. So this session, as the title suggests, as we're going to talk about some of the theories of bonds, like some of the theories which are most prevalently used in bonds. And if time persists, then I would be talking about some of the advanced ratios as well. And those ratios might have not been talked about in the curriculum of the 6-in-1 course. Okay. So I will just share my screen to you and just also tell me in the chat box if I'm audible to you clearly and visible to you as well. Am I audible to you and visible to you? Okay. Yes, yes, yes. Okay, fine. Okay. So I'll just share my screen. I'll just share my whiteboard to you. And firstly, we'll talk about some of the bond theories. And these theories are also asked in most of the interviews as well. When you are going for a fixed income research job, like where you have to search for different bond instruments for the portfolio of your clients, or you have to like recommend the bonds of different companies to different people, that is which bonds to go for. For all of those who are new to the concept of bonds, who did not understand the previous sessions or did not go through the previous sessions on bonds, I would insist all of you to watch my recordings on the previous session of bonds, where we have discussed about the fixed income instruments from very scratch, from very basic, and cleared all the concepts. Okay. So in this session, we are going ahead by talking about some of the theories of bonds. So the first theory of bonds theory, which I'm gonna discuss here, is your liquidity preference theory. So the first theory is your liquidity preference theory. So what do we mean by the liquidity preference theory? So I would derive some of the examples which I took in the previous session as well. So when we're talking about the liquidity preference theory, we can relate it to the concept of long-term bonds and short-term bonds. I will go slow in this. I discussed the same topic in the previous live sessions also. So what basically happens when you are investing into a longer-term bond, which might have a maturity of more than 5 years, 6 years, 10 years, or whatsoever. So, since you are investing into a longer term bond, the risk associated with that bond would also be high. And why would the risk associated with that bond be high? Because ultimately, you are taking into consideration a longer time period. And in the longer time period, the interest rates fluctuate a lot. You never know the interest rate goes up because the current trend, the Fed or the Reserve Bank of India or the central banks of US or the developed economies are increasing their rate of interest, right? But there's a fear of recession as well in the future. So if the recession comes into place, if the demand gets hurt, because like what's recession? Recession is nothing but due to the rise in the interest rates or due to like some of the unforeseen circumstances like COVID-19 pandemic or somewhat other reasons, the purchasing power of the people is going away. लोग सामान्य नहीं खरीदेंगे. Same they're blaming with the theory of the interest rate as well कि अगर interest rate बढ़ गए तो पैसा महंगा हो जाएगा. Ultimately, people will find it difficult to purchase things because their purchasing power will go down because of the rise in interest rate. Because ultimately, the simple logic, when the interest rate rise, the lesser amount of loan people would be taking, especially the large businesses for working capital requirements, for capital outlays. And if this thing happens, if lesser amount of loans are taken for such activities, the development activities can also be on hold and the economy can go on a recession. So basically, and I'm not saying the Indian economy, the US economy, or the economies of the developed economies will definitely go into a recession, but there is a possibility, a probability is there, right? So when you are investing into a longer term bond, your risk increases. And why the risk increases? Because of the fluctuations in the interest rate. Because in the future, you do not know the interest rate will rise, it will fall, will remain the same, or whatsoever. And in the previous session, I also told you the inverse relationship between the price of the bonds and the interest rate, the inverse relationship between the price of the bond and the interest rate. when the interest rate rises, as we can see in the present scenario, the price of the bonds will come down. And when the interest rate falls, the price of the bond rises. That's an inverse relationship between the bonds, and that we need to understand. And this concept we also call as the duration of the bond. So if any kind of corporate interview, anyone asks you that what do you mean by the concept of the duration of bonds, you just need to say to him or her that it signifies the inverse relationship between the price of the bonds and the interest rate on that bonds. If the interest rate rises, the price of the bonds come down. If the interest rate falls, the price of the bonds come up, right? And ultimately, I link this concept to the banking sector as well. People say that in the rising interest rate environment, the banking sectors, they perform very well. As we can see in the present time as well, that the banking sectors are performing really well because ultimately the interest rates have risen. And since the interest rates have risen, they would be able to lend money at a higher rate. See, like I'll take a simple example. Like for example, HDFC Bank. If HDFC Bank, like 1 year back, was giving a home loan at the rate of interest of 6.5%. Now the rate of interest might gone up to 8.2% or 8.5% because of the rise in interest rate. So it is better to earn 8.5% from a customer rather than just earning 6.5%. So ultimately, the banks are making money in that sense because ultimately their NIM, which I've talked in my videos as well, in my modules as well, the net interest margin. Ultimately, the net interest margin of the bank is increasing, which is nothing but the rate at which the banks are lending loan to the clients minus the rate at which they have taken loans from someone, because ultimately banks also take loan from other ones. For example, HDFC Bank might take a loan from the Reserve Bank of India at 6% rate of interest. If HDFC Bank, if for example, I'm not saying it has taken, just for the sake of simplicity to make you understand, if HDFC Bank has taken a loan at 6% rate of interest from the Reserve Bank of India, do you really think that HDFC Bank will lend it at same 6% to customers? Of course, no. The bank will increase the rate of interest to 7% to 8% because the bank wants to earn a net interest margin. That is the rate at which it is lending to its clients minus the rate at which the bank has taken loan. A spread it wants to earn. We also call it as a spread. So ultimately, when the rate of interest rises, the HDFC Bank would also be borrowing at a higher rate and then giving it at a higher rate. Okay. But since the interest rates have risen and the banks are able to charge a higher interest rate to clients, the bank's profitability will rise because net interest margin in simple sense is nothing but the income of bank, right? But as we all know, the inverse relationship between the interest rate and the price of the bonds. So if the interest rates are rising, the price of the bonds will come down. So banks in their books, they hold bonds or treasury bonds or government bonds. Like basically like in their balance sheet, they tend to hold government securities or bonds. So the value of those bonds has come down. And now we can relate it to the concept of equity. When in a portfolio, you have equity shares, and when the value comes down, your portfolio, it turns out to be negative, right? Similarly, in the portfolio of the banks, the self portfolio of banks, agreed, the bank is earning because of the rise in the interest rate, but the bank is facing losses in the value of the bonds. So in balance sheet, the value of the bonds is going down, and a stronger balance sheet is slowly becoming weakening because ultimately the price of the bond is coming down because banks are holding around, you can say like when in terms of treasury bonds, 60% the banks are holding in terms of bonds. Like when you check the balance sheet of any of the banks, around 55 to 60% is the bonds which the banks are holding in its balance sheet. And the remaining 40% is the mortgage-backed securities. Mortgage-backed securities. So what are the mortgage-backed securities? For example, if some loan has been given against property and like all those stuff, like basically if a person is not able to pay back the loan, the house of that person can be sold off and the money can be taken. So those are the mortgage-backed securities, right? So that is something the problem which the banks are facing. That was a general knowledge thing which I told you, and make note of this thing. So what do we mean by the liquidity preference theory? Simply, when you are investing in longer term bonds, you are taking higher risk because in the longer term, there is interest rate volatility and you never know the interest rate will rise or fall. So as a result, your bonds price can also get hurt in your portfolio. If interest rate बढ़ते गए, the bonds की value will come down to be negative. right? And when you are investing into a short-term maturity bond, the risk that you are taking is less. So basically, we can say for a higher risk, the higher return, as we call it, we are paying a certain premium. We are paying a certain premium for that longer maturity bond. Because why that premium? Because we are taking higher risk. And why that higher risk? Because ultimately we want that higher return. So that is the logic of the liquidity preference theory. So that's the first theory that we try to understand here. Any queries? Just ask me. Any queries in the chat box? Sir, how many theories are there? There are just 4 theories, and we'll try to finish it in this session only. Okay. So if there are no queries in the liquidity preference theory, we'll try to understand the second theory. The second theory is nothing but what? The second theory is your expectation theory. Okay. Yeah, the second theory is the expectation theory. First theory is the liquidity preference theory. The second theory is the expectation theory. So what do we mean by this expectation theory? The expectation theory simply says that you can predict the interest rates or the yields on short-term bonds while comparing it with the long-term bonds. In simple sense, the short-term yields are based on longer-term yields. Like for example, so like let me give you a basic example. As we see that the short-term yields or the short-term interest rate that you're getting on those bonds in simple sense, these are based on long-term yields. I'll just note it down as well. And you also people note it down. Your short-term bonds pay the yield that you are getting. It is ultimately based on your longer-term bonds, the yield. And why this concept has been said so? Because if we are saying that the shorter term yields are based on longer term yields, the longer term bonds, if we talk at a particular point of time, they might be short term as well. Like, for example, if we have invested into a longer term bond for 10 years, the bond has a maturity period for 10 years. So, once it rises and grows to that maturity period of 10 years, it will first reach 1 year also, right? It cannot reach directly just 10 years. It will go through the first month, second month, 6 months, 1 year, and 1.5 years, and so on. And a short-term bond you like invested into, which might have a maturity of 6 months. So when the long-term bond reached at 6 months level, its rate of interest might be like 6% or 5%. But the overall rate of interest that the long-term bond is giving you might be 15% because it is a longer term bond and you people have taken higher risk for higher return. But when it is at its 6th month, a proportionate rate of interest can be calculated for this longer term bond. And just assume the proportionate rate of interest comes out to be just 3%. Because if for 10 years the rate of interest is 15%, so let's assume for 6 months the rate of interest is 3%. It might not be accurate in this example, but on a proportionate basis, the people can calculate. So if for 6 months, 6 months mein jab ye bond tha, the rate of interest was 3% on a proportionate basis. So on this basis, like we can assume that if a longer term bond, when it was at a level of 6 months, the rate of interest was 3%, and you tend to invest into a short term bond with a maturity of 3 months. So you can assume, calculate on the basis of a proportionate basis, ki if the long term bond had a yield of 3% in its 6 month, in its third month, maybe the short term bond will also have a maturity or a rate of interest of just 3% only for 3 months. So that is just an estimation or a prediction that we are doing because the long-term bonds overall yield was 15%, but on a proportionate basis or maybe on a basis of the unitary method, we calculated that for 3 months, that long-term bond will give you 3%. So if separately you have invested into a different bond for 3 months, a shorter term bond, so we can say that at least 3% we must get. Like if we are getting higher, it is fine. But if we are getting lower, then we can argue that 3% must be there at least. So in this way, we can say that the yields on the shorter term bonds are based on the yields of the longer term bonds. So that's our expectation theory. Any more queries like regarding this expectation theory or the liquidity preference theory that we just talked about? So can we calculate it on a proportionate basis? Yes, just assume to calculate it on a proportionate basis, because if a longer term bond in its third month had this much amount of yield, maybe through calculation by the unitary method or on the proportionate basis, you can calculate, or you can assume just on the basis of that long term bond the yield of the shorter term bond. It will be a simple set. Just keep on asking your queries. Like, no need to feel shy and all. Like, the simplest to simplest queries I'll try to handle in the most simplest way. ठीक है, जितनी भी तुम complex queries पूछ लो, I try to handle it in the most simplest way. So that is your expectation theory, right? The third theory let's try to talk about. The third theory, you have the preferred habitat theory. The third theory that we have in here is a preferred habitat theory. So what do we mean by the preferred habitat theory? It is somewhat linked to the first theory of the liquidity preference theory. So preferred habitat theory is basically telling you that the investors, they prefer to invest in shorter term bonds rather than longer term bonds. I'll repeat, the investors prefer to invest in shorter term bonds rather than longer term bonds. And just in case, if they are investing in the longer term bonds, they're paying premium for that because they're ready to take that higher risk for higher return. But the main premise is investors prefer to invest in shorter term bonds and not the longer term bonds, because longer term bonds possess higher risk because of the interest rate fluctuation. The interest rates may rise and the bond price will come down. So in terms of bonds, you might face market to market losses. We call them MTM losses. So you might face market to market losses in your bond portfolio because of the rise in interest rate, because the bond's value will come down. But you would benefit in that sense, the interest rate that you're going to get on that bond. So that would be good. Because in one way, the interest rate that you are getting is fine, but on the other way, your portfolio is becoming negative, right? But if the interest rates goes down, your bond portfolio will have market to market gains because of the inverse relationship between the interest rate and the prices of the bonds. So basically, your preferred habitat theory is very simple. It just says invest in shorter term bonds to avoid the interest rate fluctuations. That's it. That's your preferred habitat theory. Any queries on this? Any queries you can ask? Good to go. Okay. So let's talk about the fourth theory. The fourth theory is market segmentation theory. The fourth theory is your market segmentation theory. So what do we mean by the market segmentation theory? Market segmentation theory simply says the investors are not bothered about how much time they are investing their money into. It means they're not concerned about the maturity of the bonds. That the bond will mature in 6 months, 1 year, 5 years, 10 years, 20 years, 100 years. They're not bothered about that. They're just interested in the yield that they want to have. So basically, your market segmentation theory is telling you that the investors who have purchased those bonds or who have invested on those bonds, they're not concerned about the maturity of the bonds. That is, they want to invest into 5 year bonds, 10-year bonds, 20-year bonds. They're not interested about that. The only thing for which they're interested for is they just want yield. That is your return on that bond. But return unko acha milna chahiye. They must get put adequate return. So that is what they say in the market segmentation theory. Okay. Any queries on market segmentation theory or any of the four theories that we have discussed right now? Liquidity preference theory, preferred habitat theory, expectation theory, market segmentation theory. I'll sum up in very brief. So when you are talking about the liquidity preference theory, for all of those who have watched, who have joined the session late, I will upload the recordings on the website and you people can like go through them. And any queries, feel free to ask me. Maybe on the WhatsApp or maybe through the social media platforms or maybe through in the next sessions. Okay. So the first theory that we discussed was about the liquidity preference theory. So what did we learn in the liquidity preference theory? We learned that the investors invest into longer term maturity bonds by taking a higher risk. Because why do we say higher risk? Because in the long term, the interest rates are very volatile and you never know the interest rate would rise or fall. So hence they are taking more risk upon the basis of their bond investments. So they're ready to pay a premium for that. So that's your liquidity preference theory. The second theory that we talked about was about the expectation theory. The expectation theory basically told you that the yields on the shorter term bonds, the yields on the shorter term bonds are based on the yields of the longer term bonds. And I gave you a very simple example. If someone has invested into a longer term bond separately, which might be having a maturity of 10 years, that bond won't reach 10 years straightforward. Like it will cross in a series of manner, first month, second month, 6 months, but it will mature in 10 years. So whatever the rate of interest would be for that bond for that particular 3 months, which we can calculate by the unitary method or by the proportionate method, we can assume that the same rate of interest we might get on a shorter term bond in which we have invested separately. So this is how on the basis of the longer term bonds, we can estimate, predict or forecast the yields on shorter term bonds as well, but the investments must be separate. Long term bond must be separate and short term bond must be separate. The third theory that we tried to talk about was about the expectations theory, like about the preferred habitat theory. Sorry. So in the preferred habitat theory, we learned the investors are willing to invest only in shorter term bonds. And why they want to invest only in shorter term bonds? Because the interest rate volatility is less, right? And higher risk, they do not want to take higher risk in the market, right? And they're not like ready to pay the premium for that. And just in case if they invest in the longer term bonds, they pay the premium for that. But the basic premise of the preferred habitat theory is they want to invest in shorter term bonds. That's it. And they do not want to take higher risk. The last theory that we talked about is the theory which is mentioned on the board as well, the market segmentation theory. So in the market segmentation theory, the investors are not bothered about the maturity of the bond, till how much time they're like investing into. They're just bothered about the interest rate upon that bond, the yields on that bond. They just want the yields on that bond. That's it. They might invest for 2 years, 5 years, 6 months, 10 years, 100 of years. They're not concerned about the maturity. That when will the bond mature? But the only thing they're concerned about is the interest rate upon that particular bond or the final yield that they will get on that particular. Okay, so that is basically your market segmentation theory. These are the four theories basically. Just go through them. If you joined late, then try to watch the session recording and get back to me for any kind of queries. Okay. So that was something about the bond theory. So one thing I wanted to discuss about with you is let's try to talk about, yeah, let's try to talk about something in general. I just got noted for you. There is something which is going on in the market. Two concepts which are going on in the market. One is your front running, and the second one is your name lending. Anyone knows what's front running? Anyone knows what's front running? You can just type in the chat box. Anyone has any idea that what is front running? It recently happened in the case of the Axis mutual funds as well. Two of the portfolio managers were removed because they were accused of front running. And there can be different types of like front running. Any idea? Okay. So what do we mean basically by the front running? So when we are talking about front running, so for example, if a portfolio manager is running the portfolio for his clients, okay, so that person is doing a lot of research upon that particular stocks, right? And that particular stocks, a lot of research to help his clients accumulate that amount of wealth in future. Okay. But that person can also use that thought process to fulfill his desires, that is to manage his wealth also. Okay, ideally it's not wrong because if that person has a brain, so that person, apart from just managing the portfolio for the clients, would also manage their own portfolios in a sense. Okay, but the things that happen in generally is that these portfolio managers or the people who are like running these portfolios, they might have some private sensitive information, right? Some private sensitive information they might have, which is not leaked in the public as of now. Like, for example, if a company is planning to diversify its operations, to acquire some new businesses which can increase its profitability. So that can happen like tonight. But the general investors will not know about it. They will get to know in the tomorrow morning only when it comes in the news, right? But that portfolio manager or that person who is working closely with that corporation, okay, will get to know about that. And on the basis of that decision, he can invest his personal money as well. Or he can even invest or even say his clients to invest into that particular stock by saying that tomorrow morning a positive news will come in. And the retail investors or the general public is not available or like not aware of that fact that this company is planning for such good opportunities that can increase the share price of that company or can increase the profitability of that company or the cash flow of that company. So misusing such kind of information to make profits either for himself or for his clients. For that information which is not public, private sensitive information which might come out in the market tomorrow. So that's the case of front running when you are misusing such private information to gain or to make money. So that we call as front running. And the second thing is name lending. And this front running happens a lot. Like when people get caught, like they get removed from their jobs, as happened in case of the Axis Bank. So that's the case of front running. The second one is the name lending. So name lending is basically what happens in case of name lending. Some big influential investors are called upon and they say that you have to create a hype in the market that you are buying that particular stock. In reality, they might buy the stock or not buy the stock, so that's up to them. But they have to create an image that this particular big investor is associated with that particular stock. Like for example, like when we talk about the late Rakesh Jhunjhunwala, who recently passed away. So there used to come news in the market that Mr. Rakesh Jhunjhunwala has purchased this much stake in Star Health Insurance. He made maximum of his wealth in Titan. He invested like 20% of his amount in Titan at this price, and people used to follow, right? But no one knows that was that news fair or not. In case of Titan and very good companies, the news would be fair. But what basically happens in case of name lending, big professional investors, be it Rakesh Jhunjhunwala, be it Vijay Kedia, Damani, and like many other like investors. I'm not saying they do that, but very top influential investors whose advice people follow, right? Those people might be called by that company, and that company might pay to that influential investors hefty amount in millions, billions, and crores and all that stuff, and say him that you have to show that you have purchased this much stake in our company, or you are associated with this company, you like that company, you have to say about that company like in a positive commentary. So when he shows not really investing into that company, when that particular investor really shows that he's investing into that particular company and talks about positive for that company, because ultimately like he has been paid for that company. So that's the case of name lending. Okay. So basically, either the investor cannot purchase the shares because he knows the company is bad, because but ultimately like he has been paid to promote that. And the second way can be he purchased crores and crores of shares, and that drives the price of that share in the upward direction. And he purchases it only for a short term period. Just assume that the price of the share was 20 rupees, and that company, and 20 rupees is a penny stock. जिनके बहुत सस्ते शेयर प्राइसेस होते हैं, we tend to call them as penny stock. And ये सबसे ज्यादा चीजें like penny stocks में होती हैं, right? But like बड़े stocks में भी हो सकती हैं, like those who have not performed well for like many years. So this thing can happen for those stocks as well, but it happens mostly in case of penny stock. So the company for this penny stock will go to like Mr. A very big influential investor, and say him that please invest like this much amount into our company ताकि like share price inflate हो जाए. उसको इन्वेस्ट करने का भी पैसा मिलेगा. The investor will also get money to invest. Okay. So if that person invests, basically that top influential investor, like crores and billions of money, the 20 share price might reach to 100 because they've invested lots of money. The retail investors are not investing their money. There is huge illiquidity of the stock because no one is buying and selling the stock. Up in these kind of stocks where there is huge kind of illiquidity and no one is buying that stock, these stocks are very volatile. If a single retail investor also buys that stock in huge quantities, maybe thousands and lakhs, the price would boom up because these stocks are very volatile and they affect the price of its own stock in the market as well. The 20 rupees became 100 rupees, and once it reached 100 rupees, people will see a 20 ka stock has started to increase. At 50, 60, 70, they will notice. In some news channels, they will try to portray. The top investor will come in and say, my holding is this. And he will come up at that point when the share price has reached to 9500 rupees, because at that time he knows that he's going to invest or keep on investing into that company till the time it reaches 100 only. So the news will come to us by that investor or top news channels, because that investor might come to that news channel and say that I've invested this much into that particular stock. And he will say it at the end of the time, and we people will get notice, and we will say, yeah, 20 ka 100 ho gaya, kya pata 100 ka like 200 ho jaye. And at this point of time, when it is 95 or 100 rupees, we start investing, and that big investor after that commentary sells the stock at 100 rupees. And he makes a profit, and we as a retail individual or the middle class family people, we lose all our money. सारा पैसा हमारा डूब जाता है, वो वापस 20 पर आ जाएगा. 100 पे लोग खरीदेंगे, वो वापस 20 पे आ जाएगा. People purchased it at 100, it came down to 20, but big investors, influential investors purchased at 20 and left at 100. So basically they have taken money from our pocket. And this scheme is also very popular in crypto world as well. Pump and dump scheme, we call it. This is also very prevalent in the crypto world as well. Okay, so that is basically the concept of front running, the name lending, and pump and dump. Pump is basically pumping the money in a stock or putting the money in the stock. And when it reaches a particular level and you can feel that you can make a huge profit in crores and millions, billions, you sell that stock. And the retail investors suffer because of that. So that's a pump and dump scheme. Okay. Any more queries like regarding these schemes and all? Just answer or just mention in the chat box. Yes, sir. I've seen these kinds of pump and dump schemes in the case of cryptos as well. For example, in the case of Elon Musk, he tweets on a particular news channel or on a platform, and the next day he says that he's not accepting the product. Yeah, completely. Like when we take the example of Elon Musk, you might have noticed that this guy, like Elon Musk, is quite known in terms of your Dogecoin, Shiba, and one the different kinds of cryptocurrencies. At some point of time, he says that we are accepting the cryptos for payment. And the second day, he says that the crypto is harmful for the environment and we're like not accepting the payment and the crypto must be banned. Why does he say that? Pump and dump scheme. Because at a particular point of time, he says that the crypto will do well. And like whenever he says the crypto will do well, people start to buy the crypto. Till that time, he had already pumped in billions and millions of dollars in crypto. He puts his money in crypto 1 month, 2 months, 6 months back. After 6 months, when the price has almost reached high, at that time he say that crypto is a new thing. Maybe at that point of time you might feel that like no one is investing into crypto, and suddenly why the market has risen, because we like invest into cryptos 1,000 rupees, 5,000 rupees, 10,000 rupees. The crypto would move because of that. If Elon Musk comes into place, invest $1,000 billion, $100 billion, a single person can move that crypto price. So till that time, he has made that amount. And when he tweets that the crypto is a like the new one and all that stuff, and we are like accepting the crypto for payment, people start to buy, and again the market rises. And after 5, 6 days, he says that the crypto is creating some energy problems, like clean energy is not released, harmful energy is released, and we're not accepting crypto for the payment, and the crypto must be banned. At that time, he sells it and people are buying at that moment. So again, they incur a loss and the money goes from their pocket to Mr. Elon Musk pocket. So these things are very common in the market, like that has been going on. Any more queries, anyone? Otherwise, we close the session. So people can ask me endless queries on WhatsApp, on LinkedIn, on social media platforms, call, right? Just tell me if any more queries are there. Like just tend to remember these terms. Okay. Any more queries? Okay, so if there are no more queries, we can close this session and we'll meet next week where we'll talk about some advanced financial ratios. Okay, so that's all about for today, and I'll see you in the next session. Thank you, guys.